This week we will be talking about early childhood development as it relates to psychosocial, which is also known as emotional or social emotional. So this is our final week in this age range. Next week we will move on to middle childhood, which starts at 6 years old. So I would encourage you to make sure that you have a firm understanding and grasp on the 2 to 6 year old development of the last few weeks before you move on to middle childhood next week. So we'll be talking about psychosocial development, what that looks like, primarily through the lens of Erikson, as he's our main social emotional theorist. We will look at cultural influences and variations, the importance of play in this stage, parenting styles, or also known as caregiving styles, temperament, and then we'll look at aggression, which is very common during this age and stage, and then we will look at homework at the end. So when we look at psychosocial development through the lens of Erikson's theory, we're in the third stage. We've moved into initiative versus guilt. And so the major task that they need to accomplish between 2 and 6 years old in this stage is emotional regulation. That's kind of the main crisis that we're trying to overcome here in this stage. So we want to see them exhibit effortful control, meaning they try to control their behaviors. Obviously, between 2 and 6 years old, there's a huge difference in what we see emotionally. 2-year-olds, we have what we call the terrible twos, right? And they hit and bite and scratch and take toys and don't want to share and call everything theirs. And that's very, very normal. But before 6 years old, kindergarten, first grade age, we want to see them be able to exhibit some control. So they may cry or get upset about things, but the hope is that they no longer hit or bite, and they're able to demonstrate some more control over those emotions. Initiative develops in this stage, and so that comes from that self-concept. As they get more confident in themselves and have tried in the previous stage to demonstrate some of that autonomy and independence and learn things about themselves and what they like and who they are, then here we see that develop into initiative. And so initiative comes as they get better at things, maybe develop an ability to do something that they didn't have before. Maybe they start a project on their own. They say something new because they've learned new words. And so we really want to see that sense of initiative here. It links directly to motivation. And so motivation can come from a couple of different things. One of them is intrinsic, and that means it comes from just their own inner desire. So they want to have friends, or they want to please their teacher or instructor or parent, and so that could be a determination or motivation for the change in that behavior and that control over their behavior. Or it can come from a social context. So extrinsic motivation means I'm motivated based on an external factor. Maybe, if I take a toy from someone or hit them, then I'm going to have to go to a timeout, and so I'm extrinsically motivated to not do that behavior. And so our goal with these little ones is to help them develop that intrinsic motivation. And that does develop to some degree on its own in this stage, just based on emotions and what's happening with their development. They want to feel smart, they want to feel competent, they want to please their teacher. And so some of that is going to develop naturally over time. Extrinsically, though, we can help with that by giving them rewards if needed, stickers or treats or something that can kind of help support that positive behavior. And this is different for each kid. So some kids need those external rewards and some don't. Some are fine without them. It really just depends on the kid and what their needs or what their behaviors are. The best way to remember, for me, the example I love, and the best way to remember intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation is, if you're out on a country road driving a car and the speed limit's 55 and you go 55 or 60, maybe 65, just because you are, you don't want to get a car accident, you want to follow the law and the speed limit. That's intrinsic motivation. If you're out on a country road and you see a police officer, a CHP officer, and you slow down and hit the brakes because you don't want to get a ticket, that's an extrinsic motivation. Okay, you slow down or you do something because there's an external reason, right? So this is normal and it develops over time, but we really do want to help support that intrinsic motivation. Imaginary friends are normal in this stage. That can be a normal part of emotional development. Every child does not get an imaginary friend or have an imaginary friend, but if they do, there's nothing wrong with it. It's completely normal. It meets an emotional need that some children have. and it should fade by 7 years old. Okay, if they still have an imaginary friend after 7 years old ish, then that starts to bring up a concern for us. So there was a couple of research studies that are just kind of interesting here. Children were given markers and paper for drawing in 2 groups, and sorry, 3 groups in this one, and assigned to one of 3 groups. They were given no award for drawing a picture. They were given an expected award. So, you know, if you draw this picture, you're going to get a certificate. And they were given an unexpected award. They received an award after they had already drawn something. So interestingly, the children who received an expected award were less likely to draw a picture than those who were unexpectedly awarded. So the ones who knew, if I do this picture, I'm going to get a certificate, were less likely to draw, maybe because they decided, like, I don't care about the certificate, I don't want it, right? Like, it's not a big deal to me. And so that really kind of defines the difference here between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Sometimes extrinsic motivation doesn't work. And sometimes we may think we have a great idea for a reward or a motivating tool for them, and it can backfire. So it was kind of interesting research, and it's interesting to think about and to remember. Rewards are not always the answer for motivating that behavior that we want to see. There was another study where groups of children were told that either boys or girls, same sex, are good at a particular game. So the boys were told the boys are the best at this game, and the girls were told the girls are the best at this game. And then in a separate study or category, individual children were told that one child was good at the game. And so the children who were told the general statement had lower scores than those who were told individual children were good. So in this case, if I know that boys are good at the game, then I don't really have to try if I'm a boy, right? Like, we're going to win because I already know that we're good at the game. You told me that. But if I know that individual children are good at the game and I'm in competition with one specific child, then suddenly that means that my own effort matters, right? And what I do and how much effort I give and how much I try at this game is going to influence the outcome. And so again, it's just important to think about this and to kind of know these things as you teach and interact with kiddos in this age group, because it can really determine the outcomes and how successful you are in behaviors, really. So there's cultural variations in what kind of emotions or moods are highlighted or are utilized or are used to focus or to drive behaviors, good or bad. So in the United States, we use fear to regulate behaviors, right? Threats, maybe if you don't do ... you're going to be in trouble, or you're going to have this outcome, or you're going to have this impact. In Iran, it's anger. China, it's pride. Japan, it's selfishness, etc. So just think back to when we've talked about cultural influences with Vygotsky's theory, for example. Those cultural variations and focuses can really have an impact on the child's behavior and the reason for behavior, and whether or not they're responsive to different types of interaction. So these are emotions that are typically tried to regulate in different cultures. So in the United States, we regulate fear, right? We frown on that emotion. We don't like that emotion. It's one that we try to curb if possible, or to discourage in people, right? Don't be afraid, don't be a sissy, don't be a coward, whatever. In Iran, it's anger. In China, it's pride. It's very important to be reflective on how your behaviors affect other people around you and your family members, and the impact that your behaviors can have. And so a sense of pride is really frowned upon because we want you to be more humble, right? And more receptive or responsive to the collective whole of the group and the family and who you're interacting with. So just think about this and think about the different outcomes that can happen based on, which of these behaviors we focus on. It's really going to determine what sort of outcomes we have in different cultures and the way that those interact and connect with each other. So play is extremely important in this stage. And the main reason for that is because everything we're talking about, the social emotional skills they need, the ability to interact with other people, the ability to behave better, be kind, know what's appropriate and what's not in social situations, all of that comes through play. And so there's several different types of play. 4 main ones that we usually look at, but solitary is also considered a type of play, and so is onlooker. So solitary is when children play alone. They're really unaware of any other children playing nearby, and that's normal to an extent. 2-year-olds, that's pretty normal. Younger than that, definitely normal. But as they get a little bit older, we would like to see them being aware of other children. Onlooker is when they watch other children play, and you can see this sometimes in new situations or unexpected situations. Um, if they're beginning to notice other children, but they're kind of uncertain still, or in a new situation, or maybe around new children that they don't know, they may do onlooker play for a time and then join later on, perhaps, or they might still do onlooker and then play alone solitary. Parallel play, children play with similar objects in similar ways, but not together. So you might have two children sitting in the block area and they're both playing with blocks, but maybe they're building two different things. They're not interacting with one another, or they are simply playing in the same area, but not with the same toys at the same time. In associative play, they actually interact with one another, they share materials, but their play may not be reciprocal. And what that means is, again, maybe we are building, now maybe we're building the same train track together, or we're building a castle together, but it's not back and forth. So we're next to each other, we're maybe working together on something and building the same thing, but we're not talking back and forth. For example, I'm going to put this piece over here, and then you put that one on top, and we're going to need this one to do that. And my car is going to drive this way, and then you can come over here and come from work. So they're associating with each other, but it's not necessarily the highest extent of interaction or language. In cooperative, they play together, and we see that. They create dramas, they take turns. So, in the house area, we'll see things like, I'm going to be the mom, you're going to be the dad, you do this, make this food, right? And so we see a lot of that really extended conversation, extended language, extended cognitive thinking, imagination. That's the highest level of play, and we really want to see preschool children get to this stage if possible. So 4 and 5-year-olds should certainly at minimum be doing associative play, but we should start to see some cooperative play as well in that stage. And you'll see that pretty naturally. I mean, they develop this over time just by being around other kids and interacting with one another. Active play is very normal, and we want to see that in this stage. So if we're not seeing active play in our preschoolers, there could be a disability or something else going on that we really want to look for, or watch or check into. They have a lot of muscle strength and control developing at this stage. As we just talked about, there's lots of peer interaction that happens, and as that's happening, active play becomes pretty normal, right? They make up games on the playground, they make up dramas, and they make up scenarios that they play in competitions. They're developing self-concept, as we talked about before, learning how to regulate their emotions. This happens through play. Planning happens, which is an amazing cognitive process. Self-control happens, right? Because you guys know, if you've been around preschoolers, someone will say, no, I don't want to be the dad, or no, I'm not going to do that, or no, the dog isn't going to go over here. And so these natural kind of emotional opportunities develop through play scenarios. And they really have the opportunity then to work with one another and to focus and to kind of perfect their play skills as well as their emotional behaviors. So the types of active play that we typically see is rough and tumble, which is often the boys, and drama and pretending, or the house area, which is often the girls. Not always, but if you're going to separate the groups or the types of play, that's typically how it would happen. There's always exceptions, of course, but that's the normal separation. The rough and tumble is just how it sounds. It mimics aggression, although it's not. They wrestle, they chase, they hit, but there's no intent to harm. Cops and robbers, whatever, all those things we see. And then sociodramatic play or social emotional play is pretend play, and it involves acting out various roles and themes. And you do see the kiddos cross over from one to the other type of play, but the majority group that way. So there's a parenting styles quiz in your module this week that you'll take. You do not have to be a parent to take it. It's more caregiving styles, and you'll learn the different caregiving styles, and we'll talk about them in a second briefly. But it's a very interesting quiz. I hope that you enjoy it and are surprised by your results and can learn something. You score it at the end simply by adding up the different numbers in each category. So for the A, the P, whatever the labels are on that quiz, you just add up your total number in that section, and then that's how you score it at the end. So it should make sense, but if you guys need help or get stuck scoring, let me know and I can help you. So authoritarian type of parents or caregivers, these are the most strict, okay, the very most strict category. The parent's word is the law, no questions asked. Parents will often say things in this category or this caregiving style like, because I said so, because I'm in charge, because I'm the boss, because I'm the parent, because whatever, right? If you don't behave, there's usually a strict punishment. Discussion about emotions is very rare. I don't care how you feel, you have to do it. That's what I said. I'm in charge. Okay. They may seem cold. There's not as much affection necessarily as there are in some of the other caregiving styles. So warmth is low, discipline is strict, expectations are high, communication parent to child is high, meaning there's usually a lot of lectures, there's a lot of explanations for things, right? And the child to parent communication is low. Children aren't really allowed to talk back or ask questions or ask about something, argue about something. So the one thing I want to point out is that these caregiving styles are normal. You cannot change them. Okay, you can work on things, or you can focus on different areas and perhaps incorporate one of the other types or styles, but you're not going to change your personality or who you are, right? And so there are pros and cons to each one for sure. And there is one that's the most desired caregiving or parenting style that we want to use, an approach that we want to use with children. But I want you to know that, if this happens to be your style, that is not something you have to feel bad about or feel guilty about. I by nature am an authoritarian parent. And so I just have to caution myself and watch myself and make sure that I'm intentionally giving those opportunities for engagement and for interaction and for conversation and for questions. But if I were to just let it go and be naturally the type of parent that I am by nature, it would be authoritarian completely. Um, and if you had a parent who is an authoritarian, you're more likely to parent that way as well. So you guys will have an assignment related to this, and you'll see what I mean. But it's just something to think about. But don't feel like you're a failure as a parent or a caregiver if you ascribe to one of these styles. That is not ideal. Permissive is the opposite. So permissive parents make very few demands. They hide any impatience they feel. They're just very kind of stoic, stable parents. Discipline is very lax. They don't discipline. They're very nurturing and accepting no matter what, almost to a fault. They're concerned for being friends with their child and liked by their child. They want their child to like them and be friends. They listen to whatever their child says. Sometimes that includes profanity. They cuss the parents out or they criticize the parents. And so warmth is very high, discipline's very rare, expectations and communication are low. Um, Pretty much with these parents, anything goes. You might hear them giving 10 or 12 or 20 warnings and then never following up or doing anything about the behavior. Um, they're very, very lax, is really the best word. They just really don't discipline very much at all. Anything goes. They don't want to upset their child. They want their child, again, to like them and almost to be friends with them. Um, so authoritative and equalitarian is right in the middle. And this parent sets limits, but they're flexible. They encourage maturity, and so they do have expectations, but they listen and forgive if the child falls short. They consider themselves guides, not authorities, and not friends. So they're not the utmost authority like the authoritarian parent, but they're also not friends like the permissive. It's somewhere in the middle. So I'm here to guide you. I am here to provide discipline and restrictions and expectations as normal for your age, but let's talk about it, right? So there's high communication both ways. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what happened. What did you do? Why did this happen? What can we do about it together? What do you think a solution would be? Um, so this obviously is the ideal way of parenting or caregiving. It allows for that child to sort of develop those emotions and develop that maturity without being controlled by the parent and also without being kind of left to do whatever they want. Um, there's a fourth style that you'll hear about occasionally. This is not one that you'll see on the quiz. You can't really quiz or test for this parenting style um, because this is typically a parent that has some other issues happening. So this could be a parent that is having a mental health issue of their own, postpartum depression. Sometimes we see this. An alcoholic, we might see this. So it's not really a natural parenting style or type, but something that kind of comes with maybe some difficult life experiences or something that this parent is going through. So in this case, they seem almost oblivious. It's not the same as permissive, where a permissive parent is involved and they know what's going on and they're kind of just choosing not to discipline. An uninvolved parent is really completely oblivious. It just seems like they don't care. Um, I mean, the child could even be doing something that's dangerous, and this uninvolved parent is like kind of just doesn't even know. They might be physically present in the room, but they're just really not there. Or they may not be physically present at all. Maybe they're locked in a bedroom or, whatever. So they typically raise children who are very immature, sad, lonely. They're at risk for injury and for abuse. because they have a lot of unmet emotional needs. And so in this situation, this is a parent, we would just want to get some help and some support as quickly as possible. We would really want to make sure that we can get some treatment for whatever the need may be, and get them back to their more kind of natural way of parenting and involvement in the child's life. So I love this graphic. It kind of shows the differences between the four of them, and you can see that we have a sort of trajectory here of warmth and supportiveness across the middle. So low applies to both authoritarian and uninvolved parents. They're both very low kind of responsiveness, warmth, supportiveness. Authoritative and permissive are both high in that category. And then as far as behavioral control and expectations, authoritarian and authoritative are both high, and permissive and uninvolved are both low. And then you can kind of see a lot of words that describe them here throughout the graphic. And so if you've heard or seen some of these things, then you probably have a parent who is one of these styles, right? And it's pretty easy usually to identify what your parents were growing up. And so the task for this week is going to be for you to identify who you are and what your style is like, because that's going to influence the way that you teach and interact and deal with your own kids even. And that's really important to our success kind of as parents and teachers. I mentioned that they all kind of have pros and cons. So authoritarian parents do usually raise children that are very obedient and very quiet. They could also be guilty or depressed, however, and they're often very rebellious. So I had an authoritarian parent and probably an authoritative parent, maybe sometimes even permissive, but probably authoritative. But obviously the authoritarian parent was much more impactful because of just the nature of the beast, right? And so I think that we all grew up to be very successful. I have three brothers. I think we all grew up to be very successful individuals, but there was certainly rebellion through those teenage and early adult years for all of us. Permissive parents typically raise children that lack self-control. They're very immature and unhappy usually. They have inadequate emotional regulation, so it can actually stunt their emotional growth. And the reason for that, you guys, is because kids really thrive on rules and on expectations and on structure. And so there's really not a lot of that with permissive parents, and so it almost backfires. And these kids just are so hungry for that, to meet that need of someone to tell them what to do, right, or what the expectation is, and they don't get that. And so we really see the outcomes of that as adults grow up. And then authoritative parenting, of course, pretty good outcomes. Successful children, usually articulate, happy with themselves, often generous with others. They're liked by their teachers and peers. So again, this is not across the board 100%. You may see variations, absolutely, and that's going to depend on how much of that parenting kind of happened, what the balance was, and also the personality of the child is going to determine what the outcomes are. So when we look at temperament, this is going to connect directly back to that these parenting styles in a second, and this will make sense. There's three types of temperament for babies or for children, in this age group, and it can be identified by the age of 2. So we would know when they get into this age group of 2 to 6, which temperament style they are. And so you guys have probably heard it said about babies, right? Oh, this is such an easy baby, a good baby, a flexible baby, or opposite, a very difficult baby. So the three types are flexible, feisty, or slow to warm. Obviously, slow to warm is kind of in between the other two. Flexible babies is just how it sounds. They're very adaptable. They're very positive. They're easy. They sleep anywhere. They eat on schedule. And feisty is the opposite. Those babies or children are typically in a negative mood. They have very unpredictable moods and schedules. And slow to warm is kind of in the middle. They may sometimes be adaptable and positive, sometimes maybe a little more cautious about a new situation, and it takes them some time to get used to things or warm up to things. But maybe then they settle down and they're okay once that happens. They adapt. And so throughout these types of temperament, your parenting style or caregiving style and the temperament of a child is going to determine what's called a goodness of fit. And so if you have similar temperament, similar caregiving style, similar values, it usually produces a pretty smooth interaction, and everything goes well. And if you don't, then we could have a poor fit or a poor goodness of fit, and that can really impact that temperament and that outcome for the baby or the child. So for example, if I'm a person who pops up early in the morning, I'm ready to go with no coffee, right? Like I'm ready for the day, and I have a child who's much more slow to wake up or slow to warm, then that's going to create maybe a little bit of tension or frustration. And there's millions of examples of ways that this can happen or ways that this can impact relationships. And you'll see this in the temperament activity, and in the handout that you have, you'll see the different explanations and different ways that we measure temperament. And that'll start to make more sense, but it's certainly something to think about because we really want to have relationships that have a goodness of fit. And if we don't, then that can impact both the parent and the child, and the success of their emotional development. So again, aggression is normal here in this stage. There's 4 types of aggression, and so I'll let you guys look over these and read them for yourselves, but a lot of this can be normal. Bullying, maybe not necessarily, but the other 3, we can certainly see these during preschool age, and it's not necessarily a sign for panic or that something's horribly wrong. All of these usually resolve over time normally, and there's not really an issue with these. Bullying would be the exception to that. This is a sign of poor emotional regulation. If children are unprovoked and they're doing physical attacks or verbal attacks, especially on someone who cannot defend themselves, or for no reason. If a child takes a toy from me and I hit him in the face, then that's reactive aggression, right? That it makes sense why they did it. Bullying really is unprovoked, and that's just kind of mean, intentional behavior toward another child. And so that's not normal really at any stage. If it happens once or twice and maybe the kids just don't like each other, then I might not really worry about it too much. But if it continues over time, it absolutely is something that we need to stop and intervene with, or in preschool before they go to school. It has to be addressed and dealt with, or it's going to lead to lots of other issues. So when we look at universal theory here, which we haven't really looked at too much yet this semester, we looked at it very briefly the first couple weeks, and that was Darwinism and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's a few different ones. There's a lot of things that kind of start to happen here in this stage that we can see based on the universal theory of development. And so remember, universal is basic human drives, right? Everyone has them. They're normal, they're expected. And so Freud can give us some information about that with the Oedipus-Electra complex, and you can read more about that in your book. Behaviorism says that social learning it comes through rewards and reinforcement, which kind of goes back to that intrinsic and extrinsic motivation we talked about. Sociocultural, children are influenced by norms within their family and culture. That goes back to the different types of behaviors that are regulated in different cultures. And then in cognitive, the gender schema, child's understanding of male and female differences, we start to see that here in this stage, and that's also part of their kind of normal development. So just know that aside from just Erikson's theory, which obviously applies in this stage, we do have a lot of universal theories that can apply as well, and can be looked at here. And then finally, nature versus nurture. Reminder here, nature would tell us that morality is genetic. So people are born good. Okay, that's the belief if you ascribe to the kind of nature opinion here. Morality might be a part of human DNA. Humans protect, cooperate, and even sacrifice for one another naturally. And nurture, if you believe that nurture has a stronger pull or influence, then people believe that culture is crucial to moral development. So you're not going to be born good. You're going to be born who you are, right? Whatever that means, good or bad. And the culture around you is going to influence what the outcomes are, how much you develop, what you develop, and you're going to be swayed positively or negatively by adults in your environment. And then morality is not necessarily developed naturally. Okay, so there is a controversy, of course, between individuals who believe that nature has more of an influence or nurture does. So I'll let you choose for yourselves and think about that, and you'll see this again in the module. And then you have a chapter review handout this week that will help you to kind of walk through things and think about what's important from the chapter. And that's it. So thank you guys, and I will see you again next week when we start on middle childhood.